Hello everyone, welcome to discuss in our Mastering Up YouTube channel. And today our topic of discussion will be to outline the history of international relations. My name is Esther Temilola and I will be your guide through this exciting course. So today we will talk on the ancient period up to the contemporary era and how it makes up the history of international relations. So let's get into it. The ancient period was the first period in the history of international relations, and this period spanned from 3000 BCE to 500 CE, and this was the earliest phase of international relations. We can know that during this period, there were various civilizations and empires that interacted with one another. They traded, they even had conflict with one another. And all of this laid the groundwork for modern international relations between city-states, empires, and nations. So, firstly, we'll identify the early civilizations and how they interacted with one another. We'll talk about the city-states and empires that existed in the history of international relations. Also, we will discuss how trade and diplomacy were a form of international relations between states. So, the ancient period began with the emergence of early city-states in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in the Indus Valley, and in various other states. And these city-states, they developed complex systems of governance, economy, and even trade. And all of this facilitated interactions with neighboring states. So there were trade networks such as the Silk Road that connected different state civilizations, and this helped to promote cultural exchange and also economic interdependence. So through this means of trading activities, countries were able to interact, were able to relate with one another even in the ancient period, and this laid a groundwork for international relations among states in the modern period. So as city-states expanded, there were powerful empires that rose up, and we know that there were some powerful empires such as the Egyptian, Persian, the Greeks, the Roman empires, and much more. These empires, they used various strategies to maintain power and control, such as diplomacy. They made use of military conquest, cultural assimilation, even imperialism, which was very dominant during this period. So all of these were an extension of state power and influence, and there were ways through which states and city-states interacted and related with one another in the ancient period. Also, we'll talk about the international law and diplomacy as a characteristics of a civilization that occurred during the ancient period, which brought about interactions among states. So the ancient period also saw the development of early international law and diplomatic practices. So for example, we know that the world first known peace treaty, which took place in the 1278 BCE, and at this period the Greeks and the Romans, they employed various diplomatic envoys, and they also developed different rules that governed warfare among states. So the ancient period, basically in international relations, we can say it was characterized by the emergence of complex societies and trade networks. It was also characterized by the rise and fall of empires, the development of early international law and diplomacy, cultural exchange, and even borrowing between city states. So this period definitely laid the foundation for modern international relations because it helped to influence the development of diplomacy, of international law, and as well as global governance. So when we understand this era, it will give us a valuable insight into the evolution of international relations and the complex nature of global interactions. So the ancient period was definitely an history of international relations because it laid the foundation for modern international relations. So let's look at the medieval period, which took place between 500 to 1500 CE. So during this period, there was like a transformation in the history of international relations, and this period saw the rise and fall of empires, the emergence of new political entities, and as well as the development of diplomatic practices. So here we'll discuss more on feudalism and the rise of kingdoms, the crusades and the emergence of Christian-Muslim relations, the growth of trade and also a form of interaction. So the medieval period, it began with the decline of the Roman Empire, which led to a power vacuum in Europe. Feudalism that emerged, it emerged as a dominant political and social system, and it was characterized by a lot of decentralized power such as the lord and vassal relationship and various fragmentation of authority. So during this medieval period, we see the rise of Islamic world, we see the Crusades, which were the Christians and all. So this period witnessed like an expansion or a rapid expansion of the Islamic world, and this led to various conflicts with Christian Europe or within Christian Europe. So the crusades that were there at this period were a series of military campaigns that were launched by Christian kingdoms, and it aimed to reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim rule. So the period of conflict and the cultural exchange were very profound in the history of international relations. And also the medieval period saw the emergence of city-states, particularly in Italy, which became major centers of trade and commerce. Also during this period, there was a history of international relations because there were developments in diplomacy and international law. And there were concepts that rose up during this medieval period, such as sovereignty, which mainly has to do with state supreme authority. There were the use of treaties in the medieval period, and all of these are features of international relations and ways which countries interacted with one another. There was also the use of ambassadors, there were diplomatic community that became more widespread during this period. So also, um, in the history of international relations, we focus on medieval period as one of the history of international relations because it was characterized by the rise and fall of empires. There were the emergence of new political entities such as city-states. There were conflicts that took place during this period, cultural exchange between different civilizations. So medieval period laid the groundwork for modern state system because it saw the growth of international trade, the development of diplomacy and international law. So understanding this period as an history of international relation gives a valuable insight and an in-depth understanding into the evolution of international relations and how states interacted with one another. So next we'll move to the early modern period, which took place between 1500 CE to 1815 CE. And this period also was a very transformative era in the history of international relations because this period saw the emergence of modern nation states, new diplomatic practices, and also the rise of European colonial empires. So here we will talk more on the Westphalia Treaty. We'll talk about the emergence of modern state system, the rise of European colonial empires, the development of diplomacy and international law, the balance of power and the concerns of Europe in this early modern period. So this period was very transformative because of the Treaty of Westphalia of 1648. And this treaty established the principle of sovereignty, recognizing the independence and equality of modern nation states. and this helped to lead to the development of modern state system, and it was characterized by centralized authority, territorial boundaries, as well as diplomatic recognition. So this early modern period, it witnessed the expansion of European colonial empires, and these empires were driven by the desire for resources, the desire for markets, strategic territories in different countries, and there were European powers such as Portugal, Spain, Britain, France, even the Netherlands that established colonies and trading posts around the world. And this helped to lead to the transfer of ideas, culture, which made a form of interaction and relations among states. Also, the development of diplomacy and international law was very significant during the early modern period. So this period saw the emergence of diplomatic immunity. Um, During this period, ambassadors were protected. There were diplomats that were prevented from being prosecuted in foreign territories. International law and different written works began to emerge. And the concept of balance of power that we now have today was developed during the early modern period, and this concept was developed to prevent any single state from dominating other states. So there was the concept of Europe that was established after the Napoleonic Wars, and it's provided it's a way for great powers to cooperate and maintain stability. So what we're trying to buttress in this early modern period is that it was characterized by the emergence of modern nation states and modern state system, and there was the rise of European colonial powers and global trade networks. There was the development of diplomacy, international law, balance of power, the concert of Europe, as well as the pursuit of stability in Europe. So this early modern period helped to shape the global governance, it helped to shape international relations, and it gave a framework for states to relate and interact with one another, especially in the modern period. So we will now take a look at the next era, which was the industrialization and imperialism period that took place between 1815 to 1914 CE. So basically, this period was very transformative in the history of international relations because it saw the rapid industrialization of European powers. There was the expansion of colonial empires and also the emergence of new global economic and political structures. So here we had the Industrial Revolution and the rise of capitalism, the European imperialism and how this created relations between states, the emergence of international organization during this period. So speaking of the Industrial Revolution, it actually began in Britain in the late 18th century, and it transformed the European economy and led to the Europeans desiring for global dominance. So during this period, there were different new technologies that sprung up, such as the steam engine, telegraph, and all of these were facilitated by the rapid industrialization, the urbanization, as well as the growth of international trade. So European powers who desired for resources and markets and wanted to expand their colonial empires um, allowed for a scramble for Africa, which began, and this brought about the partition into the continent and colonies where they wanted to exert their spheres of influence. So basically, this created a form of interaction because it made the Europeans to scramble, leading to a form of exploitation and colonization of people. So this colonization created a form of relations between states as the Europeans had to interact with one another, and had to um, um, have a form of relations among one another. So also we have the industrialization and the imperialism that took place, which saw the emergence of new global economic and political structures, and basically the international organization that emerged, they all emerged during the industrialization period. So basically industrialization that took place and imperialism as well created a form of interaction among states um, during this period. So also we'll look at the World War and the interwar period as the next era. So basically, the World War and the interwar period was also a transformative era in the history of international relations, and this period was very very devastating because there were devastating consequences of World War One and the rise of new global powers, the failure of the international community to prevent the outbreak of the Second World War. So during this period, there was the First World War, which was also known as the Great War. It was more like a global conflict that involved many of the major powers of Europe, including Germany, France, Britain, Russia, and this war resulted in the loss of millions of lives, widespread destruction, and also had a profound impact on the global balance of power. So in this period, we'll talk about the Treaty of Versailles and the rise of the United States as a major power. And this treaty created a form of interaction because the Treaty of Versailles made states to come together to sign this treaty, to interact and relate with one another. And although this treaty imposed harsh penalties on Germany, which included significant territorial losses and reparation, but as well, we say that this treaty established the League of Nations, which was an international organization that was dedicated to promoting peace and security. So, the United States emerged from the First World War as a dominant global power, and it was able to supplant European powers like Britain and France. So, this Treaty of Versailles created a form of interaction between states during the First World War period and the interwar years. So basically, we know that the interwar years was marked by series of crises and conflicts, including the Russian Civil War, the rise of the fascist and the nationalist movements like the Nazi Germany, the fascist Italy, Imperial Japan. So all of these countries came together to interact on a common ground, which was because of the fact that they had the same kind of idea towards a particular thing. So this created a form of interaction among different nations of the world beyond European nations itself. So also there was the establishment of the League of Nations in 1920 and its failure to prevent the Second World War. So this League of Nations was like an international organization that was designed to promote peace and security through collective security and diplomacy. So even though the League of Nations was unable to prevent the outbreak of the Second World War, it created an avenue for states to come together and interact with one another in an organization. So this also brought about an a form of relation and interactions between states of the world during this era. So also we look at the Second World War and the Cold War period and how it brought about international relations among nations of the world. So the Second World War um, was a period that was very devastating, just like the First World War. But during this period, there was also the emergence of the United States and the Soviet Union as superpowers, which brought about a Cold War. And it was more like an ideological conflict between capitalism of the United States and communism of the Soviet Union. So this Second World War was a global conflict that involved many major powers of Europe, Asia, as well as Africa. So this war resulted in the loss of millions of lives. It brought about widespread destruction, and it had a global profound impact on the balance of power. So this war led to the formation of the United Nations as an international organization um, that was dedicated to promoting peace and security. So the emergence of the United States and the Soviet Union as superpowers brought about another form of interactions between states, which was more of an international relations. So it's sought to the different two powers that had different ideologies, with the United States promoting its own capitalism and democracy, and the Soviet Union promoting communism and socialism. So these ideological conflicts shaped the course of international relations for the decades to come. So the Cold War period um, was a period where nations began to interact, because we saw that the two superpowers began to interact with different other nations of Africa, of Asia, in order for them to take sides with each of these superpowers. So there were forms of interaction in which um, we saw that the superpowers tried to give aids and assistance to different states in other continents, just so that they could receive support for their superpower motives. So this brought about a more intense interaction among nations of the world. So basically we know that the Second World War and the Cold War period laid the groundwork for modern international system, including the formation of the United Nations, the emergence of new global powers, and the ongoing conflict between different ideologies and interests. So understanding this era will give a valuable insight into the complex nature of international relations, the causes of global conflict, and the challenges of maintaining peace and security in a rapidly changing world. So lastly, we will discuss the contemporary era, which was from 1991 to the present day, and how this era has shaped the course of international relations. So basically, the contemporary era is a complex and also a dynamic period in the history of international relation, and this era has seen the end of the Cold War, the rise of globalization, the emergence of new global challenges and actors. So basically, the contemporary era actually began with the end of the Cold War, and which was basically as a result of the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. So this led to a period of unipolarity, with the United States emerging as the world's sole superpower. So the United States sought to promote its own values and its interests globally, while other powers such as China and the European Union began to challenge the American dominance. So in this contemporary era, there has been the rapid growth of globalization, which has been driven by an advancement in technology, trade, and finance. Globalization has created new opportunities for economic growth and cooperation, but it has also brought its own challenges, such as income inequality, there have been environmental degradation, there have been cultural homogenization, and also many other challenges of globalization. But however, we know that the contemporary era has seen the emergence of new global challenges such as climate change, the pandemics, terrorism. There have been non-state actors such as multinational corporations, the non-governmental organization, terrorist group that have become increasingly influential in international relations. So basically, there have been a shift from unipolarity to multipolarity. So in recent years, we have seen that the international system have begun to shift towards multipolarity with the rise of new powers such as China, India, and even Brazil. So this shift has created new opportunities for cooperation and competition, uh, and all promoting global governance. So basically, we know that the contemporary era is an history in international relations because it has been characterized by the end of the Cold War and the rise of unipolarity, and mainly now the shift towards multipolarity. So the contemporary era has laid the groundwork for a new era of international relations that has been marked by complexity, interdependence, multipolarity. So understanding the contemporary era provides valuable insights into the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century, and it also highlights the need for effective global governance, cooperation, and diplomacy. So thank you for joining me through this exciting course on the history of international relations. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Mastering Up YouTube channel, to receive more engaging and educative content like this. Thank you so much.